Hello, wonderful people. We are having it again. Conversations with Reverend Allan. A wonderful time it is in the trip of agony in marriage. Reverend Allan, what are we discussing today?
We welcome you back to our Agony in Marriage, and today we want to discuss domestic violence, especially in the context of marriage.
Wow, domestic violence it is, and we just rolled so quickly. And I want to ask us to explain what domestic violence is. Yes, Reverend.
Yeah, I would say actually domestic violence is any violence or aggressive behavior meted by a spouse to the other, typically within the context of marriage. But again, we can explain it extensively as any aggressive behavior that is meted towards household members, maybe a father attacking children or a father husband attacking wife, but within our context, typically it is meted to a spouse. Yeah.
Janet, what is your understanding on what domestic violence is all about?
Okay, thank you once again for having me here. It's always my pleasure. Domestic violence is any form of abuse. Any form of abuse, and I'm sure perhaps you're going to look at the forms of abuse that the sole aim of this kind of abuse is to exercise power and control over someone. Yeah.
So power and control, aggressiveness, and welcome, Vika. We
Thank you.
missed you.
Mm.
What's your understanding about domestic violence?
Yeah, two words. One is to look at the violence, and the violence can as well be passive or aggressive, active. And when we talk about domestic, then it is done within the context of a family, and especially people who are living together as husband and wife. And so if either of them is meeting an active abuse or a passive abuse, then we say that is domestic violence.
Wow, interesting definitions and explanations here, which brings me to a further deeper question from what defines domestic violence? How do you qualify this term domestic violence that brings agony in marriage, Reverend?
Yeah, we derive it from the word domestic. Domestic in this context means a household, people that share a common household, people that have intimate partnership in their relationship, and mostly, as I have said, it can involve a larger sense of a household, a father, a mother with children, or people around the home. But within our context, we want to do it deeper into intimate partnership, domestic violence, whereby it involves spouses, a husband and a wife, because we are dealing with agony in marriage, a husband and a wife. Whenever one of them meets this violence to the other one, that's when we say it is a domestic violence. When a husband meets violence, whether aggressive actions, whether passive or active, towards the wife, domestic violence, and vice versa. Yeah.
Yes, Janet, what qualifies this statement domestic violence? Who defines it? When you talk about domestic violence, what does our mind really interpret?
Domestic violence, I would say, just like the way Reverend has put it, I don't think I have much to say about that. Let me just agree with him.
So
Yeah.
it is between a husband and wife.
Yeah.
Spouses, people who relate closely. Vika, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, maybe to add that, and if it is between man and woman who are living together as husband and wife, and if the violence involves the children, then the children suffer the collateral damage of this relationship. And so that is the extent of that domestic violence. So it will be that maybe the children have suffered as a result of the strained relationship, yeah, and the violence of the two.
Yes,
Like
Reverend.
sometimes when you speak to somebody, they will tell you, I grew up in an environment of domestic violence. And that somebody means that my parents were meeting violence on each other. And sometimes because because children are human beings and they're relational, sometimes they find themselves in that violence either by trying to save one or by trying to stop it from happening. So sometimes they get involved. But maybe I would want to put a disclaimer. Somebody cannot beat somebody's wife or somebody's husband and call it a domestic violence. Somebody cannot beat his worker or a worker and call it a domestic violence. I would comfortably say, and I can come to a conclusion and say it must be people that have intimate relationship, husband and wife. Beating a girlfriend outside there, that's a different thing. It's a criminal offense in a different nature. Beating a sponsor, that's a different thing. It's not a domestic violence. They must be staying in the same household. A relationship that has been agreed upon and have been accepted. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. So we continue understanding who defines domestic violence and what is domestic violence, which brings me to me asking, what are some of the types of violence that we would like to highlight in this show so that people who are in agony in marriage about domestic violence can understand? What are some of the types that we can feel comfortably just to speak about in this show to bring enlightenment to our viewers? Yes, Reverend.
I can start by maybe mentioning several that can come to me quickly, like physical violence. Physical violence is a very active aggression, whereby someone may be using an object, someone may be using his hands or her hands, or even hot water pouring on each other, something that is physical and it is visible. Sometimes it causes physical body harms, whereby we normally call it wife beating in our society, even though there is husband beating, but most people know about wife beating. I normally tell a story of my former neighbor somewhere that the wife used to beat the man, and then when neighbors come, the wife would scream, yet it was the wife was beating. So we call it husband beating or wife beating. I would say this kind is the one that you quarrel and then someone just begins to slap you, give you blows, hit you, take something, and it's just a physical fight, and it can even cause death. It can even cause harm. They do this, sometimes they try to force you to take a particular direction, or to force you to keep quiet, or they do this to force you to dance to a certain tune that they want. As Janet said, to control you. Maybe sometimes it's out of anger. You are doing something or you are saying something that they don't want. They cannot handle it, so they slap you or they hit you. Sometimes they are just doing it to create fear so that you agree with what they want, control. So I would start by physical, and that is in most places. It is in most places. Sometimes some people do it deliberately because they know how to do it. Some people, they will tell you it's by accident, circumstantial. Situation came, they got angry, and they exchanged words, and they discover that they have been fighting. So that is number one, physical for me. Number two, I would speak about verbal abuse, insults, bad words, degrading words. Somebody hurls insult on their spouse, speaks something that hurts them, or speaks something that causes fear. Words of accusations, false words. Sometimes they speak about words that when other people are listening to it, it degrades the other person. And this one, sometimes it's not only from the physically strong person. Sometimes it is even from the weaker person in that relationship. I discovered in physical violence, we can always pinpoint a culprit. But in verbal violence, sometimes it is both of them. They keep on throwing it to and fro, hurting one another. So, and children can hear it, other people can hear it, or even the two of them while they are by themselves. So verbal, that is number two. Verbal abuses or verbal violence. And then number three, I'll speak about financial. Financial is when a spouse just comes and take your salary. They take your ATM by force. They go to the bank. They take everything. They spend it. Sometimes they go to your workplace. They are given all your money and they go with it. Sometimes they come in the home. They sell family property and they abuse it and they misuse it. Sometimes on the other side, they deny you financial provision. Especially when somebody has convinced you that he will be going for work, and then you leave your work, you become a house husband or a housewife, and then they don't again supply you with finances, so you become their slaves. You have to beg them to get money. That is part of financial abuses. When someone takes family finances to other places and the family begins to struggle, that's again a financial abuse. Financial abuse again would be to deny the other one an income generating livelihood. There are those people, when they marry you, they tell you you are not going to work. You will be sitting in the house. I'll be providing. You stop working. That's a financial abuse. That's a violence that is meted on you. You are strong. You have documents, but you cannot work. There are those who come to your workplace and they say you be sacked, or your business, and they say let it be closed because I'm going to provide. And mostly this one is because of insecurity. We will discuss about it later, but it is in the security. This one is insecure that you will be independent and they want to control you, or you may meet other people that will empower you.
And another thing, maybe in financial abuse, you take money to go and abuse drugs so that you can abuse your spouse. And sometimes maybe people take loans and the other one is forced to
Secretly.
pay. And another financial abuse is when crimes are done. You're forced to bail somebody out. So when it comes to financial abuse,
Like I've seen a spouse taking loan, and then the debtors come into the house to take things, and then the other spouse, since he wants to protect the children and to protect other people, pays for the loan, or the salary of the other one is attached in the process.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Pastor, spoken about physical, verbal, and I think in verbal, women are prone to have more verbal abuse, and men are prone to have more financial and physical abuse.
And sometimes it starts with verbal, and then since a woman is a talking machine, and the man cannot match the production of words, so the man decides to go physical to silence the verbal.
And financial to really put you down.
Yeah. Mostly, if you see this thing, we will discuss. It's normally like a cycle. You start, the other one, the verbal starts. Okay, you disagree, the verbal one starts. The physical one has no way to stop the verbal one. Now he releases the hand power.
The production
The hand
of
power
man.
and the funds, and the verbal continues. Yeah.
Interesting. Vika, what do you have for us?
Yes,
Any forms of violence that you might think of to enlighten us as we discuss about agony in marriage, domestic violence? I don't know why Janet and Reverend Allan are laughing when I call about Vika. Yes, Vika.
Yes. Name it all: physical, verbal, and continue financial. But then there could be others, and for every form, there are things that actually inform the thoughts that inform that particular action or violence, and one of it, which is a type and a form, is spiritual. And someone could be a religious belief in one person, who believes that maybe they are superior, or could be that it is that hierarchy, could be a religious belief. Let it be Christian, for example, and so a man believes that they are entitled spiritually to be over and above a particular person, a partner. And so that could be giving an excuse and a kind of a power control over the person. And so it takes the form, the violence takes the forms of spiritual, because you are justifying that particular act of aggression.
Maybe somebody is sick, your wife is
yes.
sick, and you totally refuse them to go and access
Access
medical help
help.
because you believe there is no that one is not applicable within your spiritual confines.
Yes, you have weird beliefs, bizarre doctrines,
And maybe cultic mentality.
yes, cultic mentality. There are several.
The other one, freedom to
Yes, those are religious violence, and a person is using so that they can control the other one. The second,
Maybe, Reverend, before we go to the second,
Yes.
there's also this category. Because I have married you, whether you like it or not, you must go to my religious convictions.
Yes.
Whether you like it or not, because I have married you.
And that is what I was saying, the entitlement. Someone is using the beliefs and dogma and that belief, the spiritual beliefs and religious beliefs, to say because it is ordained this way, yeah, and it is based on the thoughts and beliefs of a particular religion or cult or a sect, whichever way. And so they're using that to control the person. And the second one is cultural. And these cultural and traditions, in terms of a person using own culture, or it could be a different culture or a tradition of a different person, to use some of the practices, some of the practices that are done within the culture, and using that as an excuse to bring violence. Some of the things, talk about even wife beating. Some cultures actually aid or have an excuse, have a soft spot on wife beating, because in terms of say disciplining, yeah, then they have that as an excuse. And so one has a belief in culture and actually entrenched in culture, and using that same culture. Even if you talk, for example, some of our cultures around Kenya, where it takes it takes women and others to be inferior, and it could be children, could be something else, and so you use that to make violence on women or even on husbands. It could as well be in terms of culture, is that you form a culture. It can be modern day culture and a practice that is being used as these are men, we are macho, we are strong, and we are superior. Or either way, you can be that a woman is saying, I'm a feminist, that kind of a thing, and you are using the rights and privileges that are being given within the law, even as well, to make violence on men. So that one is what is giving a form of violence. The next is sexual. And this can be very debatable, and
I don't know
it's
why
an
Reverend
interesting
Allan
thing
is
in
laughing.
terms of someone using well, say sexual activities, forcing you and harming you, using the sexual advances. And you can talk about rape, and it can be rape in marriage, yeah. And if say, for example, I'm your husband and I demand sexual activity with you, could be kissing, could be caressing, could be do anything to do with sex, yeah. That one, if you are not willing, yeah, if you are not willing, because sex has to be two willing partners. And if I'm not willing, or if you are not willing, then in that case, then I'm using sex as a form of violence. That is one. Two, if it is passive, if I've not acted, that I've not forced you to do sex, if I retract, if I did not as well, denying a partner sex, yeah, sometimes as well is a passive violence. And so if your husband or your wife really needed sex, and you denied them, and you are in a position, and you are in a state of giving them that right, the conjugal right, then in that case you have done passive violence, and in that case it is a form of violence, sexual form of violence.
Interesting remarks here. Yes, Reverend Allan, do you have something to
Sexual
say?
aggression and sexual deprivation.
Yes.
Both of them are violence. You discover there are those spouses that they have forsaken their partners, and they are not engaging sexually with them. Either they are engaging outside or they are doing other things. So because marriage does not allow the loyal partner to go out. So the loyal partner has to suffer sexual starvation, whereas the person that is allowed to meet that need cannot meet it because they are starving the other one. Number two, the violence one, the aggression one, I would say, sometimes you have seen these people, they quarrel, and then they just appear and they force the other one into the act. They don't do anything that is needed to be done. But I would want to come to your point on culture and religion in the form of abuse. You see, there are some cultures and religion that allow maybe men, they can just divorce their women culturally. They come and tell you are divorced and it is done. There are some cultures or religion that allow man to have more than one woman or more than one wife. There are culture and religion that allows a man to bring a mistress or even to sleep with the wife's sister. Those are cultural abuses in marriage, domestic cultural abuses. So they say our culture allows us. So we are practicing our culture in our marriage, and that culture is hurting the other person. And most of the polygamy, it's a domestic violence. Because the women don't want the other woman, but culture says a man can marry more than one. So if you go through it in a larger context, you'll discover that it works.
Maybe in sexual violence, when another partner brings home sexual transmitted infections.
STIs.
You're forced to bear the shame, the stigma of carrying the burden of curing yourself. Maybe you were just there.
And again, they can be sharp. I saw the other one. He contracted, he infected the spouse, then he ran and treated himself. Then they went for a case. And they say, let us go and test who has it. They found the wife is having it. But the one who brought it is okay.
Recently, and addressing these issues in terms of violence, recently we had some women within this county of Kericho getting female genital mutilation. Actually, they were quote unquote circumcised so that they are able to raise boys and also to circumcise boys. And in that case, is that you are using a culture, you're using sexual practices to met violence actually on women. FGM is one which is aided by culture. It's a retrogressive culture within the people which is aiding that. And so there could be several. And when you talk about polygamy, when you talk about polyandry, when you talk about levirate marriages, we can push it further and say those are forms actually advanced and agreed upon forms of violence, agreed by culture and agreed by some religion and some practices within and tradition.
Interesting contributions there about spiritual, cultural, sexual violence, whereby we've seen genitals being chopped off. Yes, Janet. Janet, what are your? Can you add some more? Discuss some more types of violence that
Allow
we
me
see?
just to add something on Vika's the sexual part. We have also this part of lying that you're using a contraceptive. Saying that you're using a contraceptive and yet you're not. That is sexual violence. Yes.
How now? How?
It is violence because you're not seeing the sexual violence. It is, by the way, and it is proven by research. You
Women.
have lied concerning your sexual matters as a couple.
Yes.
Yeah, mostly women. It can be even men.
Because the
Men don't have a lot of
agreed purpose of
contraception.
the contraceptive
It's for
is
family
that
planning.
not only family planning, sometimes it could be diseases or other things. So when someone engages and you have an agreement that you are using the contraceptive and you're not using, you're lying to the other person.
Yeah.
Or you don't want to use, say, for example, condom. Yeah,
The agreed method.
Yeah, the agreed method.
And by
you
the way,
say-
that is it is a sexual violence, which people don't know.
Yeah.
Also, for this case of women are siring children against their spouse's wishes. It is sexual violence.
Nakutega tu hapo.
Anakutega.
Nashtukia.
Whether even in a marriage setup kuna kutegana. It is still sexual violence.
Maybe the man amezuba, so what do you do?
It's violence.
It is violence.
Control. Any time
is
you seek control.
Power and control, it is violence. Yeah.
I hope women are taking notes when you're
And
starting
men, and
children.
men as well.
When you're starting children without the spouse permission, for how long will you wait?
Without
Anyway,
agreement.
it's debatable. So let's
Yes.
continue.
But it is
John.
violence. A
Okay.
violence cannot be given any other name. It is
Okay.
violence.
Okay.
So
Yes, Janet.
I also know of some other forms of violence, like psychological violence, when one of the spouses use threats or intimidation so that they can cause fear to the other person. So when they cause fear, it means that they have more control and again power over the other person. Let me give an example. Someone does something like maybe sexual infidelity, and then they tell you, if you leave me or if you tell it out, I'm going to kill myself. I'm going to kill myself. I'm going to leave my job. You're making me not even concentrate in my work. I'm going to leave my work. That is psychological violence. You're using threats, and most of the time these people cannot even actualize their threats, but because they've learned the behavior or the psychology of the one whom violence is meted upon, then they exercise control. And then we also have emotional violence. And in this emotional violence, one person in that couple setup, they say something, they do something to make this other person feel useless or worthless. So, for example, it involves things like name calling, tagging. And by the way, emotional violence now is more common against women. Most women, their violence is the type of name calling, intimidation, feeling like what else can we say? Giving tags to a person, and these tags become self-fulfilling prophecy, and that is where now the violence comes in. Also have neglect as a form of violence. If my husband has responsibility over me financially, or is responsible for my care, maybe even not only financially, but even when I'm feeling unwell, then they do not perform their responsibility, that is a form of violence in the form of neglect. So
when somebody disappears when you need them,
yeah,
Maybe
or
I can
when
add
somebody's not there. Yes.
emotional violence. We've said presence of or absence of. So when a spouse is not available emotionally for the other, it amounts to violence. When a spouse is not emotionally available, he is doing other things around but not supportive emotionally to the other person, it's a violence. You have a spouse, your emotional need was to be met with this spouse, but they are passive there. Again, I would say one of the emotional violence that is normally common in this season is when there is an extramarital affairs, when there is other sexual scandals involving one of the spouse and the other one has to put up with. Emotionally you are hurt, but you don't want to quit. You can do nothing about it. So that can also be an emotional abuse. You know very well that your spouse is sleeping with the other person. You know very well. You feel it. You can even sense it, but you have nothing to do about it. Can also cause that emotional violence. I think again in a psychological violence, there are some calculated actions of spouses that makes the other one to behave in a certain way. There are some calculated, like someone has created an atmosphere that if you're not going to play ball, I will not pay school fees for the children. That's a psychological violence. If you are not going to play ball, I'm not going to go to I'm going to behave in a certain manner in front of your parents. Actually, psychological violence is manipulation. Manipulation. Vika knows very well that my mother and my father are here with me. Therefore, I am incapacitated from reacting. So he pulls a certain string, knowing very well that I will do nothing about them. So it's a psychological torture in nature.
Wow, interesting facts we are getting here. We always narrowed domestic violence to only physical and verbal, but we've been enlightened about psychological, emotional, sexual, spiritual, cultural, and even we've
Financial.
talked about financial. So we are taking a short break. We will be right back. Keep following us on our YouTube page, Facebook page, like, subscribe, comment, and be enriched. We'll be right back. Okay, we continue with discussions on domestic violence as we discuss about the agony in marriage, domestic violence. And I just want to begin this second session and ask us, what are some of the reasons or causes for domestic violence? What are some of the reasons that people engage in domestic violence? Janet.
Sometimes there are so many reasons, but most of the times, in fact, for the many people I've dealt with, is nurture, the environment that someone was brought up in. And sometimes this person may have learned wrong coping skills from their parents. So there's this issue again of trauma bonding coming in. So when someone grows up in an environment, whether the violence was meted upon them directly or indirectly, chances are, if they do not deal with the inner child, they are going to come out in uglier ways. Yes.
Oh. So mostly it's the wrong coping mechanisms that they
Yes.
saw. Vika, what are some of the reasons that people engage in?
In just a minute, maybe let me say something. A person who has grown up in this violent environment, the likelihood of them marrying a person who is violent is high. They have that attraction towards them. Yeah.
Why?
Trauma bonding.
Trauma bonding.
Yeah.
So trouble looks for trouble.
Trouble looks for trouble.
Okay. Yes, Vika.
Yes, apart from the nurture and the way a person has actually been raised up into believing something about life, is that some of the reasons is that we tend to become also casual in our relationships, and when we get married, is that we have a lot of interests, and those unmet interests and unmet expectations in marriage. And it could be that if we look at the forms, and the forms actually were coming from physical, economic, and so if you talk about control and power, yeah, and you want to have maybe more money, you want to get enriched, you have your own interests, you want to invest, and when they clash, when the two of you are clashing because of control over resources or even lack of the same, it has been known that poverty can actually bring about violence. But then also excess money, excess wealth, yeah, can as well bring the same violence, where a person is trying to control, to have control over that. So some of those are the reasons why people actually compete and fight within a marriage.
Maybe poverty aggresses.
Yes.
And when there is excess money, there is a sort of bullying
Mm.
and oppressiveness.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, some of the reasons,
Okay.
Reverend.
I would say number one, as all of us have said, seeking control, trying to control, and violence is one of the best tool of control. So when you want to control your spouse, maybe you want to control their finances, maybe you want to control their destiny, whatever you want to control in them or how they are behaving, one of the method that one uses is violence. Number two, again, it could be a survival tactic, a survival mechanism. Maybe the 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 way your marriage setup is, there is a continuous abuse of certain level that provoked the other one to create another abuse. Like for instance, there could be a financial abuse for a long time in a family. Do you know financial abuse? People may not know it's a financial abuse. So the other partner may resort into violence, the physical violence, as a survival tactics. They have to fight. They have to beat you up to access the resources. Again, it's still control, but looks like control to survive more than control to dominate. And another thing I would also want to say, just bad behaviors. Sometimes we just have bad behaviors. You have bad behaviors of fighting. You have bad behaviors of insulting one another. You have bad behaviors of poor spending, lack of accountability and transparency. Just bad behaviors. You've picked it from somewhere, or you've just cultivated it and nurtured it. Sometimes I would say the reason you were talking about the reason. As I said, sometimes it could be as a result of a culture that you have embraced and you are brought in from. Janet spoke about trauma bonding. And one of the things that I've discovered as a pastor, there is higher possibility that you will go through what your parents went through unless you deliberately make a decision to break the cycle. Most people that their mother were abused, they end up in a marriage whereby their husband abused them. And most people that their fathers were abused, they end up marrying the women who abused them, because it's something like something like has become part and parcel of you. So you keep on growing, looking for such a traits in people. You get attracted. So every time you discover that you are raised up in a broken family or in a violent family, it is good to be deliberate and say, I don't want to be like my parents, and to make deliberate actions. Yeah.
And what about stress? What about
I would say stress is one of them. I would say
poor communication or lack of communication?
yeah, those things. That's why I say bad behaviors. People are just careless with their friendship and with their relationship. Familiarity, knowing one another. Another thing is intruders in marriage. And intruders, foreigners, strangers in your marriage. It could be when your parents are coming into your marriage. Strongly, violence can occur because you are seeking to control. Maybe you want your wife to submit to your parents, or maybe you want your husband to submit to your parents. Maybe when your friends come in, maybe when you start extramarital things. Actually, when extramarital happens in a marriage, the most likely thing to happen is violence in that marriage, because you're trying to cover, or you're forcing the other person to accept it, or to silence them.
Okay, yes,
And
Janet.
maybe I could add something and say, from another perspective now, we have, most of us, the way we grew up, we were not taught to learn the life skill of self-awareness. So, in essence, what happens to us is that there are some impacts that we face because of lack of self-awareness. One of them is poor boundary setting. You see, when a couple starts off, they have to outline their limits and their maximums, if I may say so. So this is what we can do, this is what we cannot do, this is where we can go, this is where we cannot go. And I think this is a healthy way that couples should learn to nurture their relationship, such that whenever these forms of violence manifest, you remind your partner that we were not going down that road. Another thing is ignorance, and I'm sure most of the people will be surprised by the forms of violence that we have talked about today. But you know, ignorance has no defense. Again, some mental illnesses will will place people at a risk of becoming violent. Some mental illnesses place people, and of course we know that issues of life and sometimes nature, or let me talk about inherited traits, are the ones that cause these mental illnesses. So some violent people in a marriage setup is simply because of their inherited traits, their genetic makeup. Yeah.
And maybe the what we call a tendency of having information processing deficits, the way you process information could lead to violence. The way it is called a deficit because you cannot match the words, you cannot match the definition. Your brain reaches a place and where kama inagonga mwamba, so you resort into action.
Maybe also insecurity. Maybe also apart from insecurity in such a way that someone is just insecure in their marriage, so they keep on employing violence just to seek control. But insecurity could be one of them. Lack of self-control or self-management. How do I manage myself? Even in the matters as you are talking about information, how am I managing myself when I see my spouse in a certain situation? How am I going to manage because it takes two to tangle, the one who is beaten and the one who is beating. So self-management again can be the cause. How are you managing yourself?
Where do we place borderline personalities, Janet, in domestic violence?
Actually, for borderline, it is because borderline personality disorder is a personality disorder, maybe not a mood or anything. So this thing, by the way, this thing of borderline, if people do not really understand, or if the other partner has not made the other person know that they are borderline, or this person does not know they are borderline, actually they are very very strong abusers, or let me say violent people, in very not physical. You see, these ones we have said emotional, psychological. Borderline people have that tendency because, for example, now a borderline person fears being alone. You see, when you go to work or when you go somewhere, they say that you have left me alone. So you see, you will be psychologically abused to think that you have abandoned someone. These borderline people have this very intense fear of abandonment. So I think it goes back to self-awareness and just couples setting boundaries. And if you have a mental illness, you speak it so that people can.
Now who will marry you? Okay,
People marry people. Some of us have mental illnesses.
But you didn't speak it out and say, hey, I'm like this. You kept it under the
Because of
carpet.
ignorance.
You'll sound mental, and nobody wants a mental issue.
But you know, we are demystifying mental illnesses. We are saying that it is okay
not
to have borderline.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we continue with we've discussed about reasons, causes, maybe some of the effects we see around domestic violence. What are some of the effects? They're in our headlines, they are around us. What are some of the effects that we see?
Yeah, it goes without even saying that it has resulted in fightings, yeah, maiming of people's figures in terms of image. Yeah, talk for example, wife beating and also killing them. Talk for example, acid throwing, yeah, or hot water throwing on someone, splashing. Talk for example, rape, yeah, and within the marriage setting, yeah, people are forced. Talk for example, unwanted, and in this case unwanted pregnancy. Yeah, those are the results, the effects of domestic violence within that marriage. Yes.
Okay.
I would say about annihilations and suppressions. Sometimes because of prolonged abuse, people in their coping way, they decide to be passive in life. they no longer pursue their ambitions. The potentials are killed, and their charms, their charisma dies. So you find that people who are passive, people who are annihilated, people who are suppressed. They can't do something yet they were supposed to do something. And that's why somebody will tell you, so and so before she was married or before he was married, he was very active. It was very enterprising. But nowadays, look at them. Because you've been beaten until you say, let me just leave this business and let me just accept to be a housewife or a husband. So potentials are killed, big brains are killed. You find people are depressed, beaten people. They have surrendered to life because they want to keep their marriage. Yeah.
Maybe I'd add another effect, of course, mental illnesses and also substance use and abuse. Also, we have social withdrawal. Most of the people who are in this violent setup, you will know them by their withdrawal. And actually, some people now, instead of withdrawal now, they, I can say, they indulge more. They indulge more. You can see people who are so happy, people who are laughing, but in the real sense, it is a form of a defense mechanism. Also, there is anger, there is resentment, and the saddest part is now self-blame. The victim now starts blaming themselves for all the violence. They say, maybe if it were not for me, regrets, and then low self-esteem. This violence leaves you at your lowest and feeling worthless. Yeah.
Even shame. We've seen divorce. Another effect is extramarital affairs. Now that you are not getting this, you decide to look for other means. We've seen premature death. We've seen children being abandoned, and we've seen a society that is working in pain. There's that cycle. And as we continue to discuss, maybe I'll just ask a question to all of us, from Reverend Allan to Vic and Janet. Why do people stay in a violent environment? Be it a man or a woman, why do they stay?
Number one, I would say something that things will change at some point. So they have hope that things will change. Because I love this man or I love this woman and I am still loving them in spite of what I'm going through. I hope that things will change. So they keep on staying. Number two, the stakes. There are times that stakes are so high. You are looking at the children, you are looking at the properties, you are looking at provisions, the things that you are benefiting from in this relationship, that you are not ready to leave them and to start afresh. So that one again can cause people to say, like for instance, maybe the person who is abusing you is the one that is providing for your upkeep, taking your children to school. They are making sure that you are living in a good place. If you leave them, you're going to lose all these other perks. You know, the problem is the devil likes to be packaged in good things. So you get the good things before you meet with the devil. So when you meet with the devil, you choose whether to leave the devil or the good things. And you decide, let me just stay with the... If you lose the devil, you lose the good things. You decide, let me stay with the devil and the good things together. And then maybe number three, I would also say shame and what would people say? What would people say? What would my parents say? My relatives say? My church say? So when you think about what would people say, you say, let me just stay here.
And this notion, kuvumilia. I'm seeing Vic and very deep thoughts.
Yes.
Please tell us, why do people stay? Are you staying?
You know, he has mentioned them all. He has mentioned them all. But then you see, like, what again partly is that we as church, we as a society, is that we've placed a lot of premium on marriage and say it must be lifelong, till death. And that death is not forthcoming
Unless you are killed.
Yeah. We also said when we were beginning marriage, unless you are killed or unless you kill yourself. We also said that when we are beginning, that we are saying for better, for worse. That ideology, that mind is giving every person, if they are Christians, if they are Christians, to stay And so they stay and stay. And so part of the people that I've just interacted with, and they are going through some domestic violence, is that they have somehow that belief to say, ninachunga nyumba yangu. Sitaki iwe ni mimi nimesababisha hii. And so they continue being abused, they continue being given, sorry to say, infected STIs, but then they still say, I wanted to apply, to comply, because the beliefs in it, the spiritual beliefs, the cultural beliefs, the economic beliefs, a person actually is shackled. They are in bondage. And that is, for me, that is where the agony is. That you are going through some particular violence, but then your mind is not liberated to look at it again and set yourself free. So we must educate people to say, which other way can we, not only to cope, but then can we change the situations within this?
Janet, do you have something to say? Why do people stay in a violent environment?
Maybe just to outline the traits, the inherent traits, and the overt and the covert traits of these violent people, is that they are very romantic. They are very charismatic. You know, they are very charismatic, outgoing. They will somehow draw you back. Somehow, they have learned
their
your
slave.
ways. Yes, you are their slave. They have control and power over you. And then again, in the case of a woman who is violent, these women are also very, very charismatic and very nurturant.
Charming.
Nurturant. So this other person will miss this part of this person. Yeah. And the man who is violent, after the violence, you remember we talked about the circle of abuse. They know how to make up. They are very romantic. They will treat you well. So in one way or another, you will find yourself at a crossroad. Should I go? I will miss this. You know, he gives me money.
They split you into two.
They split you into two. Yeah.
Okay.
True. Actually, that is very true. True of people. You know, like even sex can be used, even love can be used as a kind of control. And so, but then the intention was, you are using something that is good to control this person, so that they don't go away, and they continue having power and control over them. And so a person remains a captive within that particular marriage, and they cannot even go away.
Actually, before I chip in to what Janet said, I would say sometimes somebody asks themselves, fear of the next step. Now, if I leave, what next? I have children, what next? I cannot be married again, what next? How am I going to survive? So the what next? But if I come to what she says, I have discovered most of the abusers, sometimes it's not their intention to abuse. Sometimes it's a disease again. They discover that they keep on doing it. So after they see the effect, they come back and they win you back, and you come back to them unless you break the cycle. So they would do something bad, they would hurt you, but again they would come back and win you after some time, because they have already controlled you, and they know your desperation. They know that you need them. They will still come, and you'll go back to them because you need them. You depend on them. That's why all abusers must make you to be dependent on them, such that when you leave them, there is something that you are missing. And maybe it was, I thank you. We almost lost something. You know, they just don't plan that we are coming to abuse you. There's always a process. There's always a certain process of abuse in a family or in a marriage. We normally say there's a tension. Normally a certain tension begins to build. A certain stress, a certain frustration, they begin to build slowly by slowly. Maybe a frustration, I want this one to follow what I'm saying, but she does not follow it. Or I want this one to take this path, but he's not taking this path. So the tension begins to build slowly by slowly. Then after tension, if you don't help from there, the person moves to the next step. Now there is an actual abuse. Maybe beating, maybe money withdrawn, maybe sex withdrawn, or maybe something happens. Now, when you come to this level, if you are not going to be to know, to learn a pattern that every time we come to this pattern of abuse, you will keep on living in it, because the man will come back to reconciliation, or let us make peace, or and then you experience a moment of calm for a long time. Then again you go back to the same thing. So it becomes a cycle and a cycle. Unless you come to a place and you understand there is a certain pattern in our marriage, and you break the pattern, you will live in it. So we don't live because we think that the pattern has broken. We think that the person has changed. This time round has changed. Actually, when you speak with them, they will tell you, even though my husband beats me, but this time I think he has changed. He has regretted. I think he has changed. But it's a certain pattern that it keeps on graduating.
And let me just highlight something. After now the incident that you've talked about, because that is the second stage, the incidents, there is now reconciliation, or what we call makeup. You see, even this thing that people talk about, makeup sex, it is a cover-up. It is a form of abuse. It is hidden in abuse. It's not anything that
It's
people,
abuse by itself.
it is abuse. People, it's not anything that people should really delight in. And so in this stage of reconciliation, there's a lot of happiness. There's a lot
They
of
take you out.
they take you out,
They buy you
things.
You visit your parents.
You
with
just
them.
find you have a ticket, let's go to Bahamas.
Another child.
you know?
You get another child.
You get another child in the course.
Because of reconciliation.
Yes. And after that now, it's what we call, other people call it honeymoon stage. After now the reconciliation, now they treat you well. The
Everything
action
is
now,
calm now.
yeah, it's calm. They treat you well. And in your mind, as the victim, you always think that, now things have eased up. Before you know it, we move again to tension. You're walking on eggshells. Yeah.
Okay.
And the circle goes on like that.
Which brings me to the very last question of our discussion now. How do someone end agony of violence in marriage?
Goodness.
Janet, then Vika, then Reverend Allan will end the show with us. How does one end this issue? Now there is a cycle again and again. How do you end the agony of violence in marriage?
I would say one thing that I've seen through the experience of other people: confrontation. There has to be confrontation. You have to let this person know that at this point now, this is abuse. Tell them exactly why you feel that is abuse. And at this point of confrontation, a person has to have very strong decision-making skills, so that you don't go back to your mother and then come back, and then it becomes a circle. You going and then you coming. You have to confront the behavior. But the saddest thing is that these violent people are very defensive. You see, you'll confront, but you'll be acting at your own level. This person has not acknowledged their behavior. So
They
I
actually
would
make
say,
you feel like you're the one.
actually,
Yeah, they justify that you're the one who is doing them to do that.
yeah. So they are narcissists in essence. So I would say, for me, I would say confrontation. And then I would also advise people who are in these violent setups, let it not be a circle of going home, coming back, going home. Let us break the circle. Like Reverend has put it very clearly, it has to be a very intentional decision that I should not move on this way. My kids are watching, or even it is creating something in me that wasn't there. And probably it's because I saw my mother being beaten, or my father, I don't know, doing what. So I don't see it. But these are the early years that are now affecting the kind of life that I'm living. So let us confront, let us call abuse abuse. Every time you see this abuser doing something that is abusive, it may seem like you're nagging, but that is a form of setting boundaries, establishing boundaries. A very good therapy for people who want to come out of violent relationships.
Okay, interesting.
Yes.
Yes, Vika.
That is Janet's perspective. That if you are within that domestic violence setup, is that it is you to confront. But then also from outside is that we look at marriages and which are going through domestic violence, and we must take an action on them and tell them, hey, stop it. And it can take two agencies. One, it can take the church to say, hey, you should stop this. It is not godly. It is sin to have a domestic violence. Yeah? And so it can take a pastor, it can take a bishop, it can take a church member to tell another person you should not be beating your wife. It takes also another agency, which is the government, and setting up rules and laws to say, what do we do with a person who is abusing a person? And so that one is that we need to lock them in. Yes, well, for rehabilitation. And so, and I must say that the law is there, and if you are the culprit of engaging in domestic violence, we lock you in. Yes.
I would say the power to stop it is not in the abuser. It is with the abuse. The abuser is just doing his things. So the one who has power to stop the abuse is the one who is abused. The one who is abused is the one that decides what I am ready to take or what I am not ready to take. If you are ready to take beatings, if you are ready to take any abuse, it's your decision. It's your decision because after you decide, you demand. You demand by using any method. You demand that you must respect me. If it means you go away and you stay until there is an agreement. If it means you use the law until there is an agreement. If it means you pray until there is an agreement. You are the one who is abused is the one who allows the other person to abuse them. Is the one. Nobody. I can tell you, Pastor, I don't even think the church has any power to tell me not to abuse or to be abused.
Yes.
The power is with the one who is abused. You say, from today, I will not allow my spouse to beat me up. I will not allow my spouse to abuse me sexually. And now I have decided, unless my spouse changes, I am not in this thing. I will only come back into this thing. I will lose whatever I need to lose unless my spouse changes. And we will make an agreement. You tell him, the Bible says, husband, love your wives as Christ loves the church. You tell her, my wife, the Bible says, wives, submit to your husband as the church submitted. And then you begin to define it and to work on it. And I would always advise people, after you go through you come to the second phase. After tension, you now come to the abuse. Stop there. Don't go to reconciliation. Stop there until you agree how you want to live in this marriage. You go through counseling. You demand for counseling for both of you. If the person is sick somewhere, let them be helped before you go back to them. If the person has personality problems somewhere, let them be helped before you go back to the person. And then after that, now when you come back together, make sure you also involve the community, the society, involve your parents, involve the church, involve other people. And then you say, this is our agreement. I can tell you for sure, I've never seen this kind of behavior going away until the one who is abused makes a decision. The decision can never be made by the other one.
Wow, interesting remarks. We have really talked about domestic violence, agony in marriage. We speak to us, we speak to you, we speak to the society. And it is our desire and prayer that indeed domestic violence one day will come to an end. It is from us to you. Stay well, stay strong. Agony in marriage. Conversations with Reverend Allan. See you.